All right. So we have been studying Job and for the last several weeks, and we are still in Job chapter 1, so you can turn your Bibles there. And we've discussed some things, but before we kind of do a brief recap of where we're at, I wanted to have one of the guys back there in the back read the first 12 verses of Job 1 again, just so we can reacquaint with what the story has been to this point.
In the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among the people of the East. His sons used to hold feasts in their homes on their birthdays, and they would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. When a period of feasting had run its course, Job would make arrangements for them to be purified. Early in the morning, he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, "Perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." This was Job's regular custom. One day the angels came present to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came with them. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming through the earth, going back and forth on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." "Does God fear God for nothing?" Satan replied. "Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? Have you blessed the work of his hands so that his flocks and sheep are spread throughout the land? But stretch your hand out and strike everything he has, and surely he will curse your face." The Lord said to Satan, "Very well, let everything has is in your power. But on the man, do not lay a finger."
All right. So we've, of course, gone through this, and we spent some time talking a little bit about Job and his circumstances, so we're familiar with that. And then we see this interesting behind-the-scenes look, sort of God meeting with, having this meeting in which Satan comes and attends this meeting. And we spent several weeks talking about Satan and the devil and what he is. And, you know, the emphasis that I wanted to have on through that is that Satan is a formidable enemy. I know I've repeated this a couple times. This is kind of the emphasis of it. Satan is a formidable enemy. We need to be aware of what he is, what his tactics are. We talked about that, and what he does. But at the same time, we don't need to assign him more power than what he has. He can't make us do anything. He's not God. He's not omnipotent. He's not all powerful. So he is limited. And so those are both important facts, because it's not that he can't. When I say he can't do anything to us, he can't force us to do anything. Like, he can't do anything. You know, he can't take us away from God or make us do things that we're not supposed to. But he tries to get us to through his tactics and through deceit and lies. So those are important things for us to be aware of and to look out for. So that's so that was important. And then we talked about this meeting that there's a little bit of an echo, I think, going here. We have some new equipment, so we're still working out the kinks a little bit. I think that's better. So then we get to this meeting where God, maybe that's not better. You got the God reverb going on, as Jimmy calls it. So anyway, God calls out Job and brags on Job. And we talked about how does Satan react to God's praise? What does he do?
God had the umbrella around him.
Right, yeah, he attacks Job, but he doesn't attack him by saying that he's done something wrong. You know, he doesn't say, well, look at all these things that Job's done wrong. whenever God says, look at how upright Job is, he doesn't say, well, look, what about this? What about that? Instead, he turns it and says, well, he's only good because of everything you've done for him, because of the hedge you've put around him. So he just turns it and accuses Job through basically saying, well, he's not as good as you think he is. He's not as good as he appears. And that's where we got to, is verse 9 and 10, where Then Satan answered the Lord, does Job fear God for nothing? Hast thou not made a hedge about him and his house and all that he has on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. So what is Satan's accusation against Job? We kind of just covered it a little bit, but what are some specifics that he makes accusation of here?
He's not an upright man. They haven't sinned, you know.
Right. Why does he serve God? What does he say? Why is Job serve? Because it's profitable, yeah, because it benefits Job. So he accuses him of being greedy, basically. He's only serving you because you reward him. So he's more interested in God's gifts than he is in actually worshiping God himself. And of course, like we said, that God has placed this protective hedge around him. Now, how does God respond to Satan's accusation against Job? Not at this point. God's response is to allow that to happen.
God basically says, have at it, just don't touch him.
Yeah, so basically he says, okay, I'll drop my protection around Job, and you can go get him. Do whatever you want, just don't touch him. So what do you think about that? Does that scare you at all?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's pretty, Job has no idea that this is going on. Job doesn't know about this bet between God and the devil. Of course, what are the stakes in this little war that's going on here? Yeah, Job gets creamed, right? Which is what we're about to see, but I don't know, God giving Satan permission to just do whatever he wants to Job, there's a couple of different reactions you can have. It can scare you, and it can make you mad. Like, well, that's not cool that all of a sudden everything just drops off. We may not understand why that would happen, and it leads to some questions, like, does God control everything? That's a question. We'll dive into this a little bit more as we talk. It's a pretty deep question, there's different thinking on it as far as, God created the world, and then does he control every little thing that happens, or did he set up a design for things to run, or what role does God play in the happenings of the world today? Is he responsible for every illness, for every earthquake? Does he do it? He's blamed, yeah, well, the answer to that question is complicated because the answer is kind of yes and no, I think. Yes, he does control it all, but he doesn't, to me at least, he doesn't, this is a real simple answer that, like I said, we're going to talk a lot more about as we go, but he doesn't say, oh, there's that person, I'm going to zap them, or that kind of a thing. But he set systems in place, and he does control everything through his power. That's probably not exactly a good answer, but.
No, actually, that's a pretty good answer. But he also interferes with the laws he sets in motion, the process.
Right. Yeah. Yes, he can interject at his will because he's God.
What we missed in all of that is, things occur, but despite, if I may quote Paul, or paraphrase, I've learned to be content in whatever circumstances I find myself. We focus on what's going on, and God's focus is on who you are.
Right. Yeah.
So in Job's case, it's not the circumstances that Job did where everything is great and wonderful. God's focusing on here's who Job is.
Right.
And so regardless of what happens, God's expecting Job to remain who Job is.
Job is, right. And I don't know how our mics are picking, under the new system here, are picking up, but for those of you who may not have been able to hear Charles, he was talking about Paul saying, you know, I've learned to be content whatever the circumstance, and that God looks at us as people, as a person, and because he looked at Job as a person and what Job is, he expects Job to stay what Job is no matter what his circumstances. If I'm quoting you back correctly on that. You know, so and here's another question off of that you have. You know, do you think God gives the devil permission to test people this way today?
Gives dichotomy into why bad things happen to good people.
Right.
You know, you always say that. Why do bad things happen?
And that's what, and we'll discuss that. You know, why do these things happen? Why is it the way it is? Once again, the answer to my answer to that question is yes and no. I think God does give permission to Satan to test us, but I don't think there's a scene like what we see in Job where it's like, oh, you know, yeah, can I go rip everything from this person? And God says, yeah, go do it. I think this was a special circumstance that we see. But certainly we are tested by the devil every day, and that's what we've been talking about. So yes, he does have permission to test us. You know, and then that also leads to, well, how much power does the devil have today? Like I said, there's different opinions on this. If you go to, you know, there's a lot of people who believe strongly in demon possession and angelic interference and things like that in today's world. And we see it because we see it in the Bible at times. My personal opinion on that is that we see different levels of spiritual interference in the world at different times through time. Like, you know, when Jesus was here, it seems like demon possession was on the up because I think God allowed there to be more spiritual activity at that time. And it seems like that was the time, you know, in history where there was the most of that kind of thing. As to what it's limited to today, I don't know exactly. I'm not sure. I think there are still supernatural things happening. I don't think they're at the level that they were when Jesus was here and those kind of things. So once again, sort of a simple answer, not necessarily complete there, but that's sort of a brief take on what I think of that. So the other question that it brings to my mind is why do we serve God? You know, that's what Satan attacks, right? Because it is kind of a two-thing, you know, like, well, let's see, if I believe in God and I believe in the Bible and I believe what God says, if I don't serve God, I'm going to go to hell, right? So that's pretty good motivation for serving God. So in a way, the devil's accusation is correct, right? That we serve God because of what he does for us. There again, the devil twisting things, right? Especially when it comes to Job. But do we only serve him because of what he can give us? Or do we serve him because we love him? And because
we love him.
Right.
And he has the desire to serve.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with the other motivation as far as not wanting to go to hell and wanting to go to heaven. That's a good motivation. But it shouldn't be our only motivation. We need to come to love God and to know, and we should love him when we know what he's done for us, and setting up a way to be reconciled to him and to be forgiven of our sins. Okay, so just as a kind of a summary of this part, you know, verses 6 through 12 of Job, let's just have one question here. What are, and I think we've already covered all this, but I just want to make sure that we hit it hard here. What are some things we learned about God and Satan through this passage? Yep, he's got something to say. Satan desires power. What's that? Satan and God can communicate with each other and talk to each other.
Very good at making you make a choice.
Very good at what?
In making choices.
At making you...
Choices that you make. If you choose good over evil.
Now, which are you talking about, God or Satan there? Satan's good at...
Choice to go with God.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Let Satan take over.
Right. Yeah, we have the choice. We can choose. Neither God nor the devil is forcing us to choose one or the other. We have the choice of which one, of how we go there, yes. We learn, as I mentioned, Satan has limited power. He's not all powerful. He has to ask God for permission to, and he also, notice here, he doesn't speak until he's spoken to. God says, where'd you come from, right? Now, of course, God knew where he came from, but he still says, where'd you come from? And then the devil speaks. So the devil is subservient to God. We know that.
Even the fact that it points out that God called the angels together, Satan has to come too.
Yes.
He's not free of that.
Yeah, devil. That's actually one of the questions we talked about. Like, why does he show up to this? Was he called? So Charles thinks that he was called and that he didn't just show up uninvited. So that's probably true. He was probably told to come to this meeting. All right, so let's move on now. Let's read, somebody back there want to read the rest of chapter 1, beginning in verse 13? What's that? Having some issues, all right. You want to give Elton the microphone there and let him read it?
Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And there came a messenger to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them. And the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. And I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their older brother's house. And behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are dead. And I alone have escaped to tell you. Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshipped. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong.
All right, so when we began this series of lessons, I started off with asking the question, have you ever had a bad day, or what's the worst day you can remember ever having? And, depending on where you are in your life, the answer to that question is going to be very different. As I mentioned, like when I was a kid, my worst day was having a bad baseball game or something. And then, now it would be more like, finding out that somebody's really sick or somebody died or things like, that you're really sick or things like that. So those, depending on where you're at, that answer is going to change. But Job has a really bad day here at this point. It's just one thing right after the other, like, hitting in a way that it's not even possible without some kind of supernatural intervention that this happened, So the first thing that happens is the oxen, it says the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans attacked and took them. They also slew their servants. So pull this down just a little bit. I'm still getting an echo here. Just a second. All right. So the Sabaeans slew his servants with the edge of the sword, and only one escapes. And then in 16 it says, while he was still speaking, another also came, and the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. So you get people attacking, and you also get this lightning or whatever. Some of the scholars, I kind of looked a little bit into that. Some think it was lightning, some think that there was something else, but most seem to think lightning. And there's one in particular, I think I mentioned him before, Barton. He indicated that the time of the year has to be winter because it was lightning, and that's when lightning would have hit. That's kind of making the assumption that the devil couldn't create lightning, which, once again, that kind of goes back to what we were talking about before. How much power does the devil have, and what can he do? But here again, at this point, maybe Satan had the power to create a miraculous firestorm that would have done this. Yeah, whatever. Yeah, you could have any number of things could happen. We know that things do fall from the sky occasionally, and can take us out. So it could be something other than lightning. It could have been fire, like as in a projectile, something coming down. So anyway, there's a number of things that it could be. But we see that then in verse 17, the Chaldeans formed 3 bands and made a raid of the camels. They take them. And then the last bit of news that he gets, a whirlwind, tornado, something, once again, weather-related, destroys the building that all Job's children are in, and they're all killed. So that's a lot of bad news in a very short period of time, because it's not like this news came in over the course of the day. It's like it says while he was still speaking, like right after, it just keeps coming. So then verse 20, then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell to the ground and worshipped. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. So what does Job mean by this response? How do you interpret that, or what do you get out of it? He didn't blame God. Still worshiping God.
But having lost everything, Job's not holding on that he worships God just because of what he got.
Right.
So, and that I think is significant.
Right. He's already proved, by this response, he's already proven God correct in this argument, right? First off, he said everything is God's. It's a recognition of that fact, that everything is God's to begin with. The other thing that, before I go on with my list here, that I thought of is kind of what we had talked about, that it kind of indicates that maybe Job spoke with God from time to time. Like, it almost seems to me that there might be a relationship there. And that would make sense if it is in Abraham's time, as some people, most scholars seem to think, because God was communicating with the priests of the family or the leaders of the family. We know he communicated with Abraham because this is before the law of Moses. So that's a possibility, and that may play into how he reacts here if he did have that relationship and had spoken to God. Whatever the case, God doesn't communicate with him at all through what's happening now, right? That's what we see, is that there's no communication to him as to why this is going on or what's happening. But Job is saying everything is God's, and then he says, I accept what happened. And no matter what happens, God's still in control. And like you guys mentioned, he doesn't blame or complain. I think about the way I react to things, and it's not nearly this good whenever something bad happens, and we'll blame most anything, right?
In mind too, at no point in the meeting Job's happy about it.
Oh yeah, well, we'll see that for sure. Job is not happy at all about what's going on here, but the way he reacts to it is in a way different than I think most people would react. to this happening. And then he blesses God even in these circumstances. So that goes back to what Charles has said earlier. Job is Job even in these circumstances. He stays who he is, even though his circumstances have changed from good to bad. And like we talked about before at various times, we know that we're going to hit circumstances that aren't good. Like we know we're going to go through times that are bad. And so we should expect that's going to happen. And if we know that, it can help us to have the right perspective as we're going through those struggles, as things are happening to us that we don't want to be happening to us.
You mean we're not supposed to preach the gospel of prosperity?
No. We're not. So, all right, so a couple of things that we can learn from Job's response as we face the trials of life. Well, actually, let me back up a little bit here. On my notes, I'm jumped ahead a little bit. So just a summary there. Job loses everything, his wealth, his herds, his servants, his children. Satan has questioned Job's righteousness and accuses God of placing a hedge around Job. Satan claims that Job follows God because of the gifts that God gives, and that if these gifts were taken away, Job would curse God. So Satan is actually attacking both Job and God through this accusation. He is suggesting that God has to bribe those who would follow him. God accepts the challenge, and Satan basically destroys Job. He takes away everything. As readers, we are given the reason for these events, but Job doesn't know anything about this. He has no idea that there's been this discussion between God and Satan. So after he loses everything, instead of cursing God, Job praises God. So the key here is to know God. Job knew God. And so we can see, if we realize that God is in control and that we can trust him, that's a big realization. Also, if we fear God, respect him and truly seek after him, that's a big part of being a follower of God. And then we need to see the sufficiency of God. When we are suffering, Christians can turn to God and worship him, serve him, use him as an anchor. Because, like I said, we know, we're all headed down the same road. At some point, we're going to lose our health. At some point, we're going to die. We're going to lose people. All of those things are going to happen. We know that. So we should be prepared for that through having this relationship with God, through knowing God and knowing who God is and what he does. Any other comments on chapter 1 there before we head into chapter 2?
Something very important here, and I don't think we can understate it. Job is authentic. He is who he is, as we've already said, regardless of circumstance. How many of us are authentic, that we are who we are all the time? And that's, we don't do righteousness because it's the right thing to do. We do it because that's who we should be. So it's a question of us embracing a way of life, a mindset, if you will.
Right, yeah.
So that no matter if you lose everything in your home and you're stuck on top of a hot volcano, that's rough. But it should not alter who you are.
Right. Whatever circumstance we're going through should not alter who we are and what we're doing. It's just like, think about it. Whenever, for those, I think everybody in here would remember, we have some who wouldn't, but remember 9/11. What happened right after that? Our country turned to God as a whole, right? And how long did that last? Yeah, not very long. And why is that? Because it's not who a lot of people are. It's not who they are inside. It's just a brief reaction to the circumstances. So that's why I'm saying we need to have that relationship with God, and we need to develop that, and it needs to be inside of us so that no matter what circumstance we're going through, we stay that way. We hold to that. So yeah, I think that is the key point to what we're seeing here, is that Job held to who he was, even though all of these bad things happened to him. All right, so let's go on to chapter 2, and if one of you guys are you able to read now? Or I guess Elton still has Mike, you can read this, 2, 1 through 8.
Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? That there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. He still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without reason." Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Skin for skin, all that a man has, he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand and touch his bone and his flesh. He will curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, he is in your hand, only spare his life." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with loathsome sores in the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took a piece of broken pottery with which to scrape himself while he sat in the ashes.
All right, so this is, here again we see another scene where God's called a meeting, so to speak, and Satan comes, and same thing happens again. Where did you come from? And then God calls out Job again. After everything that's happened, what about my servant Job? So we have a replication, a repeat. But now the circumstances are very different, right? God's already allowed Satan to test Job, and he's already allowed all these things to happen. And there's an interesting thing here where it says, and he still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to ruin him without cause. This goes back to kind of what we were talking about. How is God in control of things? Did God cause these things to happen to Job? Yes and no. Yet he allowed them to happen because he told the devil, yes, you can go do them.
I'm going to take a little different approach on this. I see God using Job as a sledgehammer to smack the devil.
Oh yeah, yep, no doubt.
I don't, and maybe I'm wrong here, but I don't think God's just an innocent bystander who goes, "Say, I never thought of that. Go ahead and try it."
Right, yeah. Well, he called it out. I mean, he initiates this whole thing by saying, "Have you considered my servant Job?"
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking out loud at the moment. I'm wondering how long Satan's been eyeing Job with jealous intent. And so the whole point of this, God knows what Satan wants and trying to do. And again, I know I'm speculating all of this.
Right. Well, a lot, as I mentioned before, a lot of what we're talking about in here, we don't know for sure. A lot of the stuff that we're discussing, it's some of it's speculation, and you can maybe gain some better insight into or have some thoughts as to things that will help us in our lives through that speculation. But a lot of what we're talking about, the only thing we know for sure is what the Scripture says. Those are the things that we know for sure. Everything else we're saying is conjecture or speculation or things that we can kind of put to it. So, as I mentioned, that's important because sometimes people get stuck thinking things from, Bible stories they were taught when they were young. And there's a lot of things that are in those Bible stories that aren't necessarily in Scripture, and that cause us to think a certain thing that may not be correct. So we need to stick, whenever we get down to really analyzing and saying, well, what does the Bible say? We need to stick with that. But that doesn't mean that we can't talk about other things and speculate go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that just made me think of it.
I see God setting Satan up for a massive fall. And Job doesn't know that he's the hammer and the anvil. But that's what I see. And this second, God calls them all together again.
And calls out Job again, yeah.
And I think he's doing it to tweak Satan.
Yeah, I could, yeah.
I don't know, when we look at human behavior, when you've got somebody on the ropes, what's the normal thing to do? Kind of tweak them again and get them all fired up and mad, which...
Oh, we see that with kids all the time, right? Whenever one won't stop picking on the other one, right?
Yeah. And I just see God just tweaking...
Yeah, I agree with that. And that's why I say it's kind of a yes and a no, because I don't, based on what happened, I don't think God called out the lightning down on Job. At least that's not what's indicated there, because he told the devil to go do it.
Right.
But he certainly intended for something to happen to Job based off of this discussion. He knew that it wasn't going to go Job's way for a period of time there. So I agree with that. So what does Satan then accuse Job of? Because here we get the accusation again, right? Instead of he just turns it around. He accuses him of being he doesn't care about anything else, right? He only cares about himself. He doesn't care that all these people died or that his children died. It says, he says, skin for skin. Yes, all that a man has, he will give for his life. So he basically just says, well, he doesn't care, which is interesting because I mean, it still damaged Job. I mean, it took away all of his wealth. And did damage to him, but Satan's saying, well, he doesn't care about any of that. He only cares about himself. As long as he's okay, you still put your hedge around him, basically.
It's ironic that Satan would pull something like that. That shows the deceiver he is. Because Job got up early in the morning and went and gave sacrifice to God in case any of his kids did sin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he certainly cared about his children and others, But yeah, Satan just accuses him of being totally about himself. So that's interesting. And then, of course, as we mentioned, you get this. So now God gives permission to Satan to actually harm Job physically. So let's pick up, Elton, you want to read one more time here? I'm guessing this is about all we have time for today. Verses 9 and 10.
Then his wife said to him, do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die. But he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips.
All right, so now we come back, and I think most everybody who's familiar with the story of Job knows this quote from his wife, where it's curse God and die, right? A couple of interesting things. One, the devil has left his wife alive, right? He killed the rest of his family members, but he left his wife alive. So that's one interesting thing to note here. The second thing is what she says. What do you think about her telling Job to curse God and die? What do you think of that?
I think she is who she is, and that's why Satan didn't want to touch her.
So you take the approach that he knew he knew her character there.
He knew her. Now, and again, I'm not trying to come down hard on her. She lost all her wealth, all her children. She lost everything Job lost.
She lost everything. Yep, exactly. Yep.
And she's in serious mourning also. The problem is that, and I'm not saying she's a terrible woman, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But again, we come down to the basic character. Job is who Job is. And he maintains his integrity. Her integrity appears to be tied in part to position.
To the circumstances.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that to a point. I want to point out the other side of this too a little bit, and that is, remember what we talked about at this time, because the whole argument that we're going to see in Job is the prosperity gospel. Those who are good are blessed, and those who are bad are punished, right? So at this point in time, they believe you'd be punished for doing wrong. And that's the conversation with Job's friends are, well, you did something wrong. Well, so from her perspective, she sees everything that's been lost, and she sees him suffering. What's the worst thing you could do? Curse God, right? So she may be just, there's two different ways you could take this. She may be, like what you're saying, like, okay, she's just connected into her circumstances, and so she's saying, just give it up. Or she may be saying, why don't you end your suffering and do the worst thing you could possibly do so that you'll die and have God punish you? I've thought about it in both of those two ways. Either way, certainly she doesn't have the relationship with God that Job does. She's not, as you said, she's based on circumstances to some degree or another. We can see that. But the devil left her alive, or God, whichever, once again, going back to that conversation. And what does she do? She's used as a temptation to Job.
Or, this I'm going to sound so terrible. More as a thorn in his side.
Well, as a mother too, she's lost all her.
Yeah, that's what we're saying. Yeah, she's lost everything that Job's lost. She's lost as well. But she has been left there to encourage Job to do wrong.
Yeah, I think, again, just opinion, she's suffering, and I think she's blaming Job. And,
She's blaming Job. Yeah, that's possible. Yeah.
you know, and so it's his fault.
If she follows the thinking of his friends, he did something wrong that caused all of these problems to occur to them. So yeah, she might be angry at Job. That might be an indication of anger. So yeah, there's a third way you could look at it there as well, as far as what she's saying. All right, well, we're out of time. We will pick up there. We'll discuss that some more. We'll discuss this some more. Yeah. Yeah. The devil did. Yeah. So yeah, she was being used. Yes. So anyway, we will pick up there and discuss that some more next week, and kind of talk about what was happening with Job's wife and some things that we can learn from that as well. Thanks, everybody.